What started as a simple real estate purchase in rural Tennessee would shatter everything Tom Bradley thought he knew about family, loss, and the haunting secrets buried in small-town America. The weathered barn on Maple Creek Road seemed like the perfect investment opportunity for the successful Nashville contractor. But when he pushed open those heavy wooden doors for the first time, 3 pairs of desperate eyes stared back at him from the shadows. The oldest couldn't have been more than 12, clutching her younger siblings like a mother protecting her cubs. And the words that escaped her trembling lips would echo in Tom's mind forever. "Please be our father." These weren't just any homeless children. They were the missing Hartwell kids who had vanished without a trace 6 months earlier, sending the entire county into a frenzied search that yielded nothing but dead ends and broken hearts. But how did they end up living in his barn? And why were they so terrified of going home that they begged a complete stranger to become their guardian? Tom Bradley had built his construction company from nothing, turning abandoned properties into profitable ventures across Middle Tennessee. At 42, he was successful, methodical, and completely alone by choice after his divorce 3 years prior. The barn on Maple Creek Road represented his latest project, a rustic wedding venue that would capitalize on Nashville's booming tourism industry. The property sat on 15 acres of rolling hills dotted with ancient oak trees, and the previous owner, elderly Jeremiah Hartwell, had practically given it away before disappearing to a nursing home in Memphis. Tom remembered thinking it was almost too good to be true as he signed the papers in attorney Michael Chen's downtown office, the old man's signature shaky but determined on the deed transfer. The first sign something was wrong came during his initial walkthrough on a gray October morning. Tom had expected to find the usual debris of neglect, rusted farm equipment, moldy hay bales, maybe some raccoon nests in the rafters. Instead, he discovered makeshift beds arranged in the old horse stalls, carefully constructed from salvaged materials and threadbare blankets. Empty food cans were neatly stacked in a corner, and someone had rigged a basic water collection system using tarps and plastic containers. It looked like a survival camp, meticulously organized despite its humble materials. Tom called out, assuming he'd stumbled upon some transient's temporary shelter, but only silence answered back. He was about to leave and call the sheriff when movement in the back stall caught his eye. 3 children emerged slowly, the oldest girl positioning herself protectively in front of 2 younger boys who couldn't have been more than 7 and 9 years old. They were thin but not starving, dirty but not neglected, and their clothes, while worn, had been carefully maintained. The girl's eyes held an intelligence and wariness that belonged to someone much older than her apparent 12 years. Tom recognized them immediately from the missing person flyers that had papered every storefront in Madison County for months. Emma Hartwell, age 13, and her brothers Jacob and Samuel, ages 10 and 8. They were the grandchildren of the very man who had sold Tom the property. "Don't call the police," Emma whispered, her voice steady despite the fear flickering in her dark eyes. "Please, mister, we can't go back there. We won't survive it." The way she said those words, with such adult certainty, made Tom's blood run cold. These weren't just runaways seeking adventure. They were refugees from something that had driven them to choose homelessness over returning to whatever they were fleeing from. Jacob, the middle child, stepped forward with surprising courage for someone so young. His freckled face set in grim determination. "Our grandpa said you might be different from the others. He said you might understand what it's like to lose everything and have to start over." Tom felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Jeremiah Hartwell had known his grandchildren were living in the barn when he sold the property. This wasn't a coincidence or a desperate last resort. It was a calculated plan, orchestrated by an old man who was running out of time and options. But why hadn't Jeremiah simply taken the children with him to Memphis? Why arrange this elaborate deception instead of involving social services or law enforcement? And what exactly were these kids running from that made living in an abandoned barn preferable to going home? Samuel, the youngest, tugged on his sister's sleeve and whispered something that made Emma's composure crack for just a moment. Tom caught the words "mama's boyfriend" and "the basement" before Emma quickly shushed her brother. The pieces of a horrifying puzzle began forming in Tom's mind, but he forced himself to stay calm and focus on the immediate situation. These children had been surviving on their own for months. which meant they were either incredibly resourceful or they'd had help. Given that their grandfather had owned the property until recently, Tom suspected the latter. "How long have you been living here?" Tom asked gently, crouching down to appear less intimidating. Emma's defensive posture relaxed slightly, but her eyes remained watchful. "Since April," she replied. "Right after Mama brought him home and he started changing things." She glanced meaningfully at her brothers, clearly editing her words for their benefit. "Grandpa Jeremiah said he was selling the barn to someone who might understand. Someone who'd lost people too and wouldn't just send us away without listening first." The old man had researched Tom's background before the sale, Tom realized. Jeremiah knew about the divorce, about Tom's struggles with his ex-wife's alcohol addiction, about the miscarriage that had ultimately destroyed their marriage. Somehow, the old farmer had identified Tom as a potential ally rather than just another adult who would automatically return the children to their legal guardian. But this revelation raised even more disturbing questions about what was happening in the Hartwell family and why traditional authorities hadn't been able to help these kids. Emma pulled a worn envelope from her pocket, Tom's name written across it in spidery handwriting he recognized from the property deed. "Grandpa said to give you this if you found us and seemed safe." Tom opened the letter with trembling hands, Jeremiah's words painting a picture of desperation and calculated risk that made his stomach churn. "By the time you read this," the letter began, "I'll be in Memphis and my grandbabies will be in your hands. I know this ain't fair to you, but I'm out of time and options. Their mother's boyfriend ain't right in the head, and the sheriff won't listen to an old man's suspicions without proof I can't get without putting the children in more danger." The letter went on to detail months of growing concern as Emma had started showing signs of severe anxiety whenever she visited the farm, and both boys had developed behavioral changes that worried their grandfather deeply. Phone calls to their mother went unanswered, and when Jeremiah tried to visit their home in nearby Gallatin, he was turned away by a man named Derek Walsh who claimed the children were sick and couldn't have visitors. It was only when Emma managed to slip away during a school field trip and show up at the farm with her brothers in tow that Jeremiah learned the full scope of the situation they were fleeing from. "Derek locks us in the basement when Mama's at work," Emma had apparently told her grandfather, according to the letter. "He says we're being punished for existing, and that if we tell anyone, he'll make sure Mama never finds our bodies." The old man had wanted to call the police immediately, but Emma begged him not to, explaining that Derek was a former corrections officer who had friends in law enforcement and had already convinced everyone that the children were troubled liars who made up stories for attention. Jeremiah's solution had been desperate but strategic: keep the children hidden on his property, while he arranged to sell it to someone who might be willing to help them properly. Tom looked up from the letter to find 3 pairs of eyes studying his face intently, searching for any sign of his intentions. The weight of their trust and vulnerability hit him like a physical blow. These weren't his children, and he had no legal right to make decisions about their welfare, but Jeremiah's letter made it clear that traditional channels had already failed them. "Your grandfather was a smart man," Tom said finally, folding the letter carefully. "But we can't just pretend this situation doesn't exist. You kids deserve better than hiding in a barn, no matter how scared you are." Emma's expression hardened again, and she stepped backward, pulling her brothers with her. "You're going to send us back?" she accused, her voice flat with resignation. "Adults always do what's easiest for them, not what's right for kids." The bitterness in her young voice broke Tom's heart, but it also revealed just how much these children had been let down by the system that was supposed to protect them. Jacob spoke up unexpectedly, his voice small but determined. "We won't go back there, mister. We'll run away again, and next time we won't trust anybody." Tom found himself at an impossible crossroads. Legally and morally, he should contact Child Protective Services immediately, but Jeremiah's letter suggested that previous interventions had only made things worse for the children. The old man had specifically mentioned that Derek Walsh had connections in local law enforcement and social services, people who had already dismissed the children's claims as attention-seeking behavior. If Tom made the wrong move, he could be sending these kids back into the very situation they'd risked everything to escape from. What if there was another way? Tom asked carefully, his mind racing through possibilities. What if we could make sure you're safe without sending you back to Derek? Emma's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but he could see a flicker of desperate hope there too. There ain't no other way, she replied. We're kids. Nobody listens to kids, especially when adults don't want to hear what we're saying. Samuel spoke up for the first time since Tom had arrived, his young voice carrying an adult weariness that was deeply unsettling. Derek said if we ever told anybody the truth, he'd hurt Mama too, and it would be our fault. The manipulation and psychological abuse these children had endured was becoming clearer with every word they spoke. Derek Walsh had isolated them from potential help by making them feel responsible for their mother's safety, a classic tactic used by abusers to maintain control over their victims. Tom realized that even if he could guarantee the children's safety, they might not be willing to take action that could potentially put their mother at risk. It was a horrible calculation for children so young to have to make, and it explained why they'd chosen to disappear rather than fight back through official channels. Tell me about your mama, Tom said gently, settling cross-legged on the barn floor to appear less threatening. Does she know where you are? Emma shook her head sadly, and Tom noticed tears forming in her eyes for the first time since he'd found them. Mama thinks we ran away because we don't like Derek. She doesn't know about the basement or the things he makes us do when she's not home. Derek told her we're just acting out because we miss our daddy, and she believed him because she wants to be happy again. The tragic picture became even clearer as Emma explained how their father had died in a construction accident 2 years earlier, leaving their mother, Lisa Hartwell, struggling financially and emotionally. Derek had appeared 6 months later, charming and helpful at first, offering both emotional support and financial stability. By the time his true nature revealed itself, Lisa was already dependent on his income and convinced that her children's complaints were just resistance to having a new father figure in their lives. Tom felt sick thinking about how perfectly Derek had orchestrated the situation, isolating the children from their mother and their grandfather while positioning himself as the reasonable adult dealing with difficult kids. It was textbook predatory behavior, and it had worked exactly as intended. Your mama loves you, Tom told the children firmly. Whatever Derek has convinced her, she loves you and wants you to be safe. We just need to find a way to show her the truth without putting any of you in more danger. Jacob stepped forward again, his young face serious beyond his years. Grandpa Jeremiah said you lost somebody important too, and that's why you might help us. Who did you lose, mister? The question caught Tom off guard, forcing him to confront grief he'd spent 3 years trying to bury. I lost my baby before she was born, he said quietly. And then I lost my wife because we couldn't figure out how to be sad together instead of apart. Samuel tilted his head with innocent curiosity. Is that why you don't have any kids of your own? The simple question hit deeper than Tom expected, bringing back memories of the nursery that had sat empty for months before his ex-wife finally insisted they convert it to a home office. He'd thrown himself into work after the divorce, building his business into a success while avoiding anything that reminded him of the family he'd never had. Finding these children in his barn felt like fate offering him a second chance, but he couldn't let his own emotional needs cloud his judgment about what was best for them. Maybe that's exactly why I'm supposed to help you, Tom admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. Maybe your grandpa knew that someone who wanted kids but never got to have them might be willing to fight harder for someone else's. Emma studied his face intently, her mature eyes seeming to weigh his sincerity against her hard-earned skepticism. Fighting for us means going against Derek, and Derek doesn't lose. He's too smart and too connected, and he always has a backup plan. Tom pulled out his phone, but Emma immediately tensed. I'm not calling the police, he assured her quickly. I'm calling someone who might be able to help us figure out the right way to handle this situation. He dialed the number for Jennifer Martinez, a family attorney who'd handled his divorce and had mentioned working with abuse cases in the past. If anyone could navigate the legal complexities of this situation, it would be Jennifer. The phone call was brief but enlightening. Jennifer listened to Tom's carefully edited explanation of finding homeless children on his property and immediately grasped the delicate nature of the situation. She agreed to meet them at the barn within an hour, bringing with her a social worker named David Kim who specialized in cases involving familial abuse. Don't let those kids out of your sight until we get there, Jennifer warned. If they've been hiding this long, they have good reason to be afraid, and we need to make sure we don't make things worse by moving too fast. While they waited, Tom convinced the children to show him how they'd been surviving in the barn for the past 6 months. Their resourcefulness was both impressive and heartbreaking. They created a functional living space using salvaged materials, established routines for gathering food and water, and even set up a basic school schedule using books Emma had stolen from their old home. Samuel proudly showed Tom the garden they'd planted behind the barn, where tomatoes and beans were growing in neat rows despite the approaching winter. We learned all this from Grandpa Jeremiah, Jacob explained as he demonstrated their water filtration system made from sand, gravel, and cloth. He used to tell us stories about surviving during the Great Depression, and he taught us which plants we could eat and how to trap rabbits without hurting them too much. Emma added quietly. He said if we ever needed to disappear, we should remember that people survived hard times by being smart and careful, not by giving up. The old farmer had essentially prepared his grandchildren for a life on the run. Tom realized, which suggested he'd known for some time that their home situation was untenable. Jeremiah had taught them survival skills while hoping he'd never need to use them. But when the situation with Derek escalated, he'd had a backup plan ready. It was both brilliant and tragic that a grandfather had felt compelled to train children for homelessness rather than trust the system to protect them. Jennifer Martinez arrived exactly on schedule, followed by David Kim in a separate vehicle. Tom had worked with Jennifer during his divorce and respected her no-nonsense approach to complex family situations. But he wasn't sure how the children would react to more adults entering their carefully protected world. Emma immediately positioned herself between her brothers and the newcomers, her body language screaming distrust despite Tom's assurances that these people were there to help. "We're not here to take you anywhere you don't want to go," Jennifer said immediately, her voice calm and professional. "Tom told me you've been living here for several months, and we want to understand why before we make any decisions about what happens next." David Kim added gently, "I work with kids who've been in situations similar to yours, and I want you to know that nothing you tell us will be used to force you into a situation where you don't feel safe." Emma's skepticism was palpable, but she seemed to recognize something in their approach that was different from other adults she'd encountered. "Everybody always says that," she replied, "but then they do what's easiest for them anyway. How do we know you won't just send us back to Derek and tell ourselves you did the right thing?" Jennifer nodded seriously, acknowledging the validity of Emma's concerns. "You don't know that, and you shouldn't trust us just because we're adults telling you to. But what if we could show you a plan that keeps you safe while we figure out how to deal with Derek permanently?" David Kim pulled out a tablet and showed the children a presentation he'd prepared specifically for cases like theirs. It outlined various options available to families in crisis, from temporary protective custody to witness protection programs for children testifying against abusive adults. "The most important thing is that you get to be part of deciding what happens next," he explained. "No adult gets to make choices about your safety without your input, including your mother." The mention of their mother caused all 3 children to exchange glances loaded with meaning Tom couldn't quite interpret. Samuel spoke up unexpectedly, his young voice carrying a weight that made all the adults pay attention. "What if Mama chooses Derek over us? What if she doesn't believe us even when you tell her the truth?" It was clearly a fear that had been haunting all 3 children, the possibility that their mother's emotional dependence on Derek might outweigh her protective instincts toward her own children. Jennifer knelt down to Samuel's eye level, her expression serious but kind. "That's a really hard question, and I can't promise you that won't happen. But I can promise you that if it does, there are people who will make sure you're taken care of no matter what your mama decides. You won't be alone, and you won't be sent back to Derek no matter what." Emma studied Jennifer's face intently, clearly trying to determine whether this promise was something she could trust. "There's something else," Emma said finally, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Derek didn't just hurt us. He made videos of the things he did, and he told us he'd show them to everyone at school if we ever told anybody. He said nobody would believe us, but everybody would see the videos and know we were bad kids who deserved what happened to us." The admission hit the adults like a physical blow, adding another layer of complexity to an already horrific situation. Tom knelt down and took Emma's hands in his, looking directly into her frightened eyes. "This isn't your fault," he said firmly. "Your mama's not rejecting you. She's grieving the fact that she couldn't protect you from Derek. She's going to need time to process what happened, but that doesn't mean she doesn't love you or want you back." Samuel started crying again, overwhelmed by the idea that their escape might have somehow broken their mother permanently. David Kim provided additional context that helped the children understand their mother's condition better. When someone trusts a person completely and then discovers that person was hurting the people they love most, it can cause something called traumatic shock, he explained gently. Your mama's brain is trying to protect her from information that's too painful to accept all at once. It's like when you fall down really hard and you're too stunned to cry right away. Except this is emotional instead of physical. The psychiatric evaluation of the children revealed the extent of Derek's psychological manipulation and the remarkable resilience they developed in response to their situation. All three showed signs of post-traumatic stress, but they also demonstrated exceptional coping skills and a strong family bond that had helped them survive their ordeal. The psychologist recommended that they remain in Tom's care while their mother recovered, noting that the children had already formed a trusting relationship with him and felt safe in his presence. Legal proceedings moved quickly once Derek's crimes were fully documented. The videos he created as tools of intimidation became the primary evidence against him, and additional charges were filed when investigators discovered he'd been systematically abusing his position as a corrections officer to target vulnerable families. His arrest led to a wider investigation that ultimately revealed a network of predators operating within the local law enforcement and social services community, explaining why the children's previous attempts to seek help had been unsuccessful. Tom found himself navigating the complex process of becoming a temporary foster parent, while simultaneously managing his construction business and helping 3 traumatized children begin the healing process. The barn became a symbol of survival rather than hiding, and Tom converted it into the wedding venue he'd originally planned, with the children helping design features that would make it special for families celebrating new beginnings. Emma gradually opened up about her dreams for the future, revealing an intelligence and ambition that had been suppressed by months of survival mode living. She wanted to become a social worker herself someday, helping other children who found themselves in impossible situations with no adults willing to listen to them. Jacob showed an aptitude for building and construction that impressed Tom, while Samuel demonstrated artistic talents that had flourished even during their darkest days in the barn. The reunion with their mother came 3 weeks after Derek's arrest, in a carefully supervised setting at the hospital where Lisa was receiving treatment. She had spent hours viewing the evidence against Derek and working with therapists to understand how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. The meeting was emotional and difficult, with both sides needing to rebuild trust that had been shattered by Derek's systematic manipulation. "I failed you," Lisa sobbed as she held her children for the first time in months. "I was supposed to protect you, and instead I brought the person who hurt you into our home. I don't know how to forgive myself for that." Emma, mature beyond her years as always, comforted her mother with words that revealed just how much she'd grown during their separation. "Derek was really good at lying, Mama. He fooled both of us, just in different ways. What matters now is that we're all safe, and we can be a family again." The question of permanent custody arrangements proved more complex than anyone had anticipated. Lisa wanted her children back desperately, but she also recognized that they'd formed a strong bond with Tom during their time in his care. Tom found himself reluctant to give up the children who had brought purpose and joy back into his life, but he was equally committed to doing what was best for them, even if that meant stepping aside. The solution came from an unexpected source: Emma herself, who had been quietly observing the adults struggling with decisions about her family's future. "What if we didn't have to choose?" she asked during one of their family therapy sessions. "What if Tom could be part of our family too, like an uncle or something? He helped save us, and he loves us, and Mama likes him. Maybe there's a way for everybody to get what they need." The idea of an extended family arrangement appealed to everyone involved, creating a support network that would benefit both the children and the adults who cared about them. Tom became a permanent fixture in the Hartwell family's life, providing stability and male role model presence while Lisa focused on rebuilding her relationship with her children. The barn property became a gathering place where the family could create new, positive memories to replace the traumatic ones Derek had imposed on them. Derek Walsh eventually pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His conviction led to policy changes in the local social services and law enforcement agencies, creating better protocols for investigating reports of child abuse and ensuring that predators couldn't use their positions of authority to silence their victims. The children's courage in finally speaking out had protected not only themselves but potentially countless other families who might have fallen prey to Derek's manipulation. The barn wedding venue became hugely successful, partly because of the story behind its creation and partly because of the genuine warmth and hospitality the Hartwell family brought to every event they hosted. Emma often helped with wedding planning, her natural empathy and organizational skills making her popular with brides who appreciated having someone who truly understood the importance of family bonds. Jacob learned construction skills working alongside Tom, while Samuel created artwork that decorated the venue and brought beauty to celebrations of love and commitment. Years later, as Emma prepared to graduate from high school with plans to study social work in college, she reflected on how the worst period of their lives had ultimately led to the best outcomes they could have imagined. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Tom had just called the police that first day instead of listening to us. She told her mother during one of their regular heart-to-heart conversations. We might have ended up in the system, separated from each other, and Derek might have found a way to escape consequences for what he did. Lisa, now remarried to a kind man who treated her children as his own while respecting Tom's special role in their lives, nodded thoughtfully. Tom saw you as people worthy of being heard, not just problems to be solved. That made all the difference in how everything turned out. The family had grown to include Tom's new wife Sarah, a pediatric nurse who specialized in treating traumatized children, creating an even stronger support network for the kids as they navigated the ongoing process of healing from their experiences. The story of the three orphans who weren't really orphans, who begged a stranger to become their father and ended up creating a family larger and more loving than any of them had dared to dream, became a testament to the power of listening to children when they try to tell adults about danger. Tom never regretted the day he opened those barn doors and found 3 pairs of desperate eyes staring back at him, because that moment had transformed not only their lives but his own, proving that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most meaningful relationships, and that family isn't always defined by blood, but by the willingness to fight for each other's safety and happiness.